Welcome to the revolution. Vladimir Putin accuses the West of Satanism and announces his annexations in a terrifying speech. This is wild, okay? It says, minutes after the speech concluded, Ukraine announced it would formally submit an application to join NATO. Let's go ahead and read this article. This article is coming from Vice.com, so you know it must be 100% completely non-biased and accurate. It says, Russian President Vladimir Putin delivered a speech at the Kremlin today where he announced the annexation of portions of Ukraine, Donetsk, Kherson, Zaporizhia, and Luhansk. In a speech, he accused the West of being Satanists and said that Russia wants to lead an anti-colonial movement to smash the West. He then formally announced the annexation of territory that Russia invaded and took by force. After the speech was over, the Associated Press reported that Ukraine had officially applied for membership to NATO. U.S. President Biden called on the annexation as illegitimate, promised to continue to support Ukraine, and announced his new sanctions on Russia. If you have not been following this, Vladimir Putin literally has been threatening nuclear war against the West for the past 2 to 3 weeks now. And nobody seems to be taking this seriously at all. It's so puzzling to me. It's been since the Cold War of the 80s, 40 years almost since we've had any threat of nuclear war against the United States of America, and nobody's taking this seriously. You go look at all of the articles, even the articles on Vice, what I'm reading right now. Everything about it says Vladimir Putin's television stations keep threatening everybody with nukes, and nobody, it's some really, a circus show is the name of this. Why Russia's state TV keeps threatening to nuke everything. Now, to be fair, that was from 5/10 of 22, so a fair amount of months between now and then. But if he was threatening that 4 months ago, why are we not concerned about that today? Right? You listen to the White House press secretary, you listen to Joe Biden himself, you listen to the weird little scrawny Halloween Nightmare on Halloween Town, or Nightmare on Halloween looking guy. I forget his name, but he's like the I'll have to look up who he is, but he said something basically along those. We are, the only conversation that's going on about this right now is that they're going to continue supporting Ukraine. We're going to nuke you if you keep throwing them weapons that are causing destruction against our country. And our government is going, do it. That's all they're saying. They're not trying to de-escalate tensions. They're not trying to do anything at all to save the lives of my family and yours. They're specifically just taunting them, saying, no, you won't. I don't know if you guys forgot this, but it literally just takes one erratic president or leader of a country to just tap a button and it's all over. It's all over. Look at Hiroshima. Look at the Nagasaki. Look at all of the damage that happened as a result of what we in the United States did to another country. Obliterated. Literally black, smoldering shadows on the ground. If you've ever seen those pictures, they're spine-chilling. There's like these shadows of children shown in pictures where basically as soon as Hiroshima hit, they just were obliterated. And all that was left was their ash just scorched into the cement. And meanwhile, while we're getting all of these verbal threats for nuclear war, nobody, publicly at least, is seeming to take this seriously at all. Now, this is even more interesting because I guess within the last day or so, let me go ahead and pull this screenshot that I had up from my phone, which makes this even more concerning. This was from today. It says NATO issues an alert to member nations after Russian submarine carrying doomsday weapons has gone missing from Arctic base. You heard that right. NATO issues an alert to member nations after Russian submarine carrying doomsday weapons, meaning nukes, goes missing from Arctic base. Now, this article, which is a post from Real News No Bullshit, one of my favorite places to get my news from, NATO has warned members that a highly sophisticated Russian nuclear-powered submarine able to carry doomsday weapons is no longer operating out of its base in the Arctic, raising speculation that Russia could have moved the vessel near Ukraine or to an undisclosed area for a test. NATO officials say that Russia the Russian submarine is no longer operating out of its White Sea base, where it has been active since July. They add that Russia may have been planning a test to test a Poseidon weapon system, which is a drone capable of carrying a nuclear bomb. The Poseidon system can be deployed from the submarine and it's detonated at a depth of a half mile. Russian state media has claimed the weapon system can create a 1,600-foot wave that has been dubbed a radioactive tsunami. Oh my God. I haven't read this article yet. Why is nobody talking about this? Literally go scroll the damn news right now, and nobody's talking about the fact that Russians' submarine, which they have threatened to cause a nuclear tsunami with from underneath the water against their enemies, is missing. Nobody's talking about this. Not a single conversation that I've heard besides Real News, No Bullshit. It's not on Vice. It's not on The Hill. It's not on Fox. It's not on CNN. It's nowhere. They want to keep all of this conversation to a minimum, which tells you that they don't think they're bluffing. If they thought they were bluffing, they would not be screaming from the mountaintops the way that they are. They wouldn't be minimizing this stuff on the social media channels, right? I mean, screaming from the mountaintops about how they're not going to do anything, right, to the general public. They're obviously not saying that to the soldiers. They're not saying that to the military. They're saying that to you and I, because they want to make you naive to what's really going on here. And this is horrifying. Strategic intelligence expert Rebecca Koffler reacted to the news, saying that while Russia has had major setbacks in Ukraine, the world should not underestimate Russian submarine and nuclear capabilities. She added that there have been times when Russian nuclear-powered attack submarines armed with long-range cruise missiles went undetected for weeks close to U.S. shores. Ooh, man. I don't know. This is the closest that we've ever been to nuclear war in at least 4 decades. And they're downplaying the hell out of it. Nobody on mainstream media is talking about these things. And that one right there is terrifying. Terrifying. So let's go back to this here. We're Putin's calling our government Satanists. And if you know the history of, this podcast and you've listened to a fair amount of the episodes that we've discussed these things, that's not too far off. It's really not. When you look at the Bohemian Grove situation, you look at the references to Malak in Hillary Clinton's emails, you look at all of these things that show that the elitists of our country, the Illuminati symbolism that is used, and if you go actually look at these things, because don't take my word for it, but actually go look into it, because it's pretty wild once you see that the way they shake hands and the specific photos that they have where they're like looking through the eye of Horus, and like all of these really interesting symbols that are used to kind of speak this language that you and I aren't privy to, that has been associated with our politics, right? And that gets really deep. You can go back to, some of the other podcasts that we've talked about that, but it's a real thing, okay? Go do your own research on it, and I'm sure I will do an episode on it again in the future. And this almost sparks my interest again because, he's not too far off. All right, it says that Putin's speech on the annexation of the territories is the accumulation of war that began in 2014 when Kremlin-backed forces seized Crimea and pieces of eastern Ukraine. I want the Kiev authorities and their real masters in the West to hear me so that they remember this. People living in Luhansk and Donetsk, Kherson and Zaporizhia are becoming our citizens forever, Putin said. He also went on to say that we call the Kiev regime to immediately end hostilities, end the war that they unleashed back in 2014, and return to the negotiating table. We are ready for this, but we will not discuss the choice of the people in Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson. That has been made. Russia will not betray them. In a 2005 speech, Putin told the world that the collapse of the Soviet Union was the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the century. It was a theme he returned to in his speech announcing the annexation of the territories seized from Ukraine. As once before, after the revolution, the borders of the Union republics were carved up from behind the scenes, he said. so that the last leaders of the Soviet Union, contrary to the direct expression of the will of the majority of the people in the referendum of 1991, destroyed our great nation, confronting the people with a fait accompli. Not sure what that means. I admit that they did not fully understand what they were doing and what consequences this would inevitably lead to in the end. But this is no longer important. There is no Soviet Union. The past cannot be brought back, and Russia today does not need it anymore. We are not striving for this. Putin's speech was ostensibly about the annexation of the territory into Russia, but he kept returning to the West. Yeah, because the war is not against Ukraine. It's against NATO and the US. We know that. Every speech he's ever given indicates that this is a proxy war with Ukraine against NATO and the United States. It's not about Ukraine. Ukraine is just the arm of the NATO and UN that's being, funded to fight this war because they don't want a world war. It goes on to say that he blamed Anglo-Saxons for the destruction of the Nord Stream 1 and 2 pipelines without blaming a specific country. Sanctions were not enough for the Anglo-Saxons. They moved on to sabotage. He said during the Reuters translation, "It is hard to believe, but it is a fact that they organized the blast of the Nord Stream, international gas pipelines, which run along the bottom of the Baltic Sea. In fact, they began to destroy the pan-European energy infrastructure. It is clear to everyone who benefits from this. Of course, he who benefits did it," Putin said. Putin also made a veiled joke about how sex change operations during his speech. According to Financial Times Moscow bureau chief Max Sedin, he accused the West of outright Satanism. Putin said that he wants to lead an anti-colonial movement. So he basically, and they don't actually call him out for, they don't quote him on that, but he said that they were doing gender surgeries on children, which is absolutely accurate. Nothing he is saying here is that wild. Yes, there are people within high political positions and celebrities who practice Satanism. Yes, we as the Western culture and society and leader of Western culture are doing gender reassignment surgeries, basically castrating our children in the name of wokeism. Nothing is wrong here. There is not any mixing of words. He's not saying anything that's off at all. Which is even more terrifying when you know he's about to nuke us for it. So he said the speech included one reference to nuclear weapons, typical for Putin's recent public statements. Oh, typical Putin, threatening us with nukes. Ha 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 ha, Vice News. What? How is that typical? Oh, typical. Literally, that word typical just downplays the idea of a nuclear attack on your families, murdering all of us over his belief of their, satanic and child regendering surgeries, and more so, obviously, the fight that's happening in Ukraine. So he's just calling us out for our culture, while simultaneously, obviously, the war is over Ukraine and NATO, right? If you don't know the backstory, let's just touch on it. Putin didn't want Ukraine becoming a part of NATO because then NATO has the ability to attack Russia from a very, 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 very close proximity. Just in the same way that if Mexico was taken over by Russia and now there's nukes on our border, and at any time they could press a single button and in the split second, we're all dead. Right? It just gives access to begin to encroach on our territory, which is what Ukraine was, which only became a thing in 2014 after Obama administration basically overthrew the government in a coup. Okay? There's your backstory. That's what this is about. Goes on to say, during several speeches in February after the invasion, he made direct nuclear threats and put Russia's nuclear forces on high alert. In a speech announcing the partial mobilization of the Russian people on September 21st, Putin accused NATO of using nuclear blackmail and said he would not hesitate to use his own nukes. To those who allow themselves to make such statements about Russia, I would like to remind you that our country also has various means of destruction, and for some components more modern than those of NATO countries. He said in September, and if the territorial integrity of our country is threatened, we will certainly use all means at our disposal to protect Russia and our people. This is not a bluff. That's the words of the president of the country that our country is currently in a proxy war with. It says, with the referendum, Putin has expanded the territory which he has threatened to protect with nuclear weapons. He used the threat of nuclear war to do it. But it was quick in a speech today to point to America. The U.S. is the only country in history who has ever used nuclear weapons. True. Creating a precedent, by the way, he said. The speech ended with Putin and four Moscow-backed leaders of the territory Russia forcibly seized holding hands and chanting, "Russia, Russia." Minutes after the speech concluded, Ukrainian President Zelensky released a video where he announced Ukraine would be applying for membership to NATO, further poking the bear. Right? If you don't think that's a response to show that, this is getting so, this is pretty scary stuff, guys. Like, if you haven't been paying attention to this, if you have not been concerned about this, you really probably didn't need to. But this is getting, it's hard to even try to wrap your head around and be concerned. We are in a Cold War with Russia now, today, right now. These words that are happening is exactly what was happening during the Cold War. They have their fingers over the button saying, you won't do it. And if you do it, I'll do it too. We are in a Cold War with Russia, the United States is, while also, which wasn't a part of what was going on before, in a proxy war with them already. Terrifying.